Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session for a wonderful Saturday morning. We have today's session on succession by and from women under the Hindu Succession Act 1956. And today's session will be taken by Honorable Mr. Justice Anil Kshetrapal, sir, who's a judge with PNH High Court. And sir, first of all, thank you so much for giving us time and coming all the way to the academy to take this session. Sir, I will just take a moment to introduce you. I am sure my lordship doesn't need any introduction, but just a quick one, sir. Sir was born in the year 1964 in the month November or 19th of November. Sir belongs from Kurukshetra and has a legal background as Sir's father, Mr. S.P. Kshetrapal sir, was also a practicing advocate in Kurukshetra. In 1987, after completing LLB, Sir enrolled in Bar Council of PNH and started practicing in the same year in Kurukshetra. Thereafter, in the year 1988 May, he shifted his practice to PNH High Court and joined the office of Honorable Mr. Justice V.K. Bali, sir, who's a retired Chief Justice. In 1991, Sir started independent practice on civil and constitutional side. In 2014, Sir was designated as senior advocate by the PNH High Court. His lordship was elevated as an additional judge of PNH High Court of Chandigarh on 2017 on 10th of July. Sir, I would not like to take more time and talk anything. I think because there's so much to share after having a word with you. You are you're so eager to share the information. I was just to inform everyone. I was talking to Sir before the session started, and I said, Sir said, how much time do we have so that we can keep it concise? And I said, Sir, we have 1 hour. He's like, no, I can talk for long. It's Chetan up to you. You have time or not. Because Sir was saying that I'm eager to share with everyone what information I have. So I would request everyone to make the most out of it. As we always say in the session that the webinar will go into a format wherein Sir would detail the session. And as we always recommend all the participants to hold their questions till the last, because most of the time, the question that you might have in your mind will obviously be detailed out by the presenter, by the speaker. So you keep it to the last, and then even if you need more clarity of that particular point has not been covered, then ask the question. Sir, I welcome you to today's session, and I hand over this session to you, sir. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to directors of the Judicial Academy and SCC Online for giving me opportunity to come and share my views. Without wasting further time, let us get on to the topic. The topic is in two parts. If you just read it carefully, it has been divided in two parts. One is succession by women, and second part is succession from women. Now, under the Hindu Succession Act, succession from women is governed or regulated by section 15 and 16 of the Hindu Succession Act, and succession by women is regulated by section 6 and section 14 of the Hindu Succession Act. Now, I will first take up second part, which is succession from women, because that is, according to me, is an area which has not been really discussed in the judgments, and now daily the problems are coming. Section 15 is the first section which deals with general rules of succession in case of female Hindus. If all of you have the BEAR Act, kindly open it. I will be highlighting some points which would be really useful for everybody. First thing which everyone must keep in mind is that the schedule attached to the Hindu Succession Act, which provides or gives a list of class 1 and class 2 heirs, does not deal with the succession of a female or women. Please note and see that schedule is referring to section 8. Section 8 is dealing with succession of males and not females. So whenever you are deciding a case or you're examining a case of a succession from a woman, then keep schedule which is attached to the act aside. That will not be applicable. I'm repeating, schedule is not applicable when one is dealing with or examining succession from a woman. If a property of a female is in dispute and dispute is with regard to succession, schedule does not apply. This is first part. Now let us go to section 15. It talks of general rules of succession in case of female Hindus. It is subsection 1 of section 15 is perimeteria to schedule, because schedule talks of class 1 and class 2 heirs. Here it has been divided into 4 categories. First category is section 15 subsection 1 clause A, that succession would devolve upon sons, daughters, including children of any predeceased son or daughter, and the husband. So first category is children or grandchildren of a female and husband. If a female has left behind 2 sons, 3 daughters, and a husband, the property is divided equally in 6 shares or 6 parts. Each son would get 1/6 share, each daughter would get 1/6 share, husband would get, not each husband, it is one husband because Hindu laws only permits one husband. So it's husband gets 1/6 share. This is, one can say that this is the first class 1 for our understanding, because we are used to that class 1 and class 2 heirs. Therefore, for succession of a female Hindu, class 1 heirs are sons, daughters, including grandchildren of a predeceased son or daughter, and husband. Now, this is first part. If anyone from clause A is available, the succession finishes there. It doesn't go further. But if no one is available from there, that means she doesn't have a children, she doesn't have grandchildren, she doesn't have husband, then we go to clause B. Clause B talks of upon the heirs of the husband. Now there is a trick behind it, and I will explain what is the, because now this all these clauses have lots of ifs and buts, and I will be explaining how it operates. So class B is heirs of the husband. Now next clause is upon the mother and father. If a female has left behind, has not left behind her own children or grandchildren, she doesn't have husband, she doesn't have heirs of the husband, then class 3 would be upon the mother and the father Now fourth is clause D, which is upon the heirs of the father. That means if none of the persons mentioned in clause A, B, C is available, then it will fall upon heirs of the father. Then next category is if again from none of from A, B, C, D is available, then it is covered by clause E, which is upon the heirs of the mother. Now this is the scheme with which the general rules of succession of a female Hindu would be governed. But as I said that there are lots of ifs and buts, but is governed by subsection 2 of section 15, which is starting with a non-obstante clause. Non-obstante clause is notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1. The meaning of non-obstante clause is that this clause has been placed at a higher pedestal than other clauses. That means this subsection 2 would have preference or has been placed at a higher pedestal than subsection 1. If subsection 2 operates, then it will overshadow the rules which have been laid down in subsection 1. So let us examine how section 15.2 operates. Section 15.2 is again divided into two different clauses. First is clause A, which is with regard to if the property has been inherited by a female Hindu from her father or mother. Now please mark, if the property is inherited by a female Hindu from her father or mother, it shall devolve upon, in absence of any son or daughter of deceased, including the children of predeceased son or daughter. That means that if a female Hindu has died, he has not left behind his own children, her own children, or her own grandchildren. Then section 15 subsection 2 clause A would apply if the property has come from her father and mother, and then it will go by that it will devolve upon the heirs of the father. Now please mark the word, even if the property has come from mother of that female, she dies, she does not leave behind her own children or grandchildren, then the property would devolve upon heirs of her father, not mother. I am stressing once again, please note the word used is upon the heirs of the father. Now there is another catch therein, that the poor husband is left out. So if the property has come to a female from her father or mother, she has a husband but she doesn't have any child or grandchildren, then husband doesn't get the property. The property would devolve upon heirs of her father. That means it will revert back to the father, and the succession of the father would operate thereafter. Now, once we go to section 16, there is a legal fiction. I just want to cover this so that everybody is clear on this. Legal fiction is this, that if the situation is governed by section 15 subsection 2 clause A, that the property had come from mother or father and she does not have her own children or grandchildren, then deeming fiction is that her father has died immediately after her death. This is a legal fiction which has to be presumed. This is a legal fiction which has to be created while deciding succession. So by legal assumption, her father would be deemed to have died immediately after the death of that female. So property has first gone back to the father. From father, the property would go to the heirs of father as per schedule or section 8 of the Hindu Succession Act, because father is a male. Now, this is first part of non-obstante clause in section 15(2). Second part is, if the property was inherited by a female Hindu from her husband or from her father-in-law, then in absence of own children or grandchildren, it would not devolve upon the heirs mentioned in subsection 1, but upon the heirs of the husband. Now, kindly look at section 15(1) clause A. Section 15 subsection 2 clause B provide that if a female Hindu has got a property from her father or father-in-law, in absence of her own children, the property would devolve upon the heirs of the husband. So, just to summarize what is the scheme, that section 15(1) talks of a normal scheme how the succession would devolve upon. Section 15(2), which is with a non-obstante clause, which has been placed at a higher pedestal, governs even succession which is provided under section 15(1). So if the property is self-acquired, property would be governed by sections 15(1) clause A, B, C, D, E. But if the property has come from her father or mother, it will be governed by clause A of subsection 2 of section 15. If the property has come to her from her own husband or from her father-in-law, then the property would be governed by clause B of subsection 2 of section 15. This is how we understand. Now, best example of operation of this clause A of subsection 2 I can give. I happen to deal with one case. One person had 3 daughters from first marriage. During subsistence of first marriage, it is a case of when a second marriage took place before 56 Act. He married again. From second marriage also he got one daughter. So he had 2 wives and 4 daughters. Now, first wife died during the lifetime of the husband. So when that person died, he had left behind 5 class 1 heirs, widow, second wife, and 4 daughters. Now, the daughter from second marriage was unmarried. She died. Now the question arose, who would get the property? View was taken that Shin's daughter, deceased daughter who was unmarried, had left behind her own mother who was related to her by full blood. By operation of section 18, she would be the only successor, and her property would devolve upon her mother. When the matter came in this court, we re-examined this entire scheme, And then what I found out was that it will be clause A of subsection 2 of section 15 would operate. If clause A operates, then by legal fiction, property which had come to that unmarried daughter from her father would go back, revert back to her father, and her father would be deemed to have died by legal fiction immediately on her death. So property for split of second goes back to the father. Father also dies. Then his class 1 heirs are all the 3 daughters from first marriage and widow, that is second wife. So property was divided into 4. That is how these things operate. And that's why I am explaining. Please keep in mind now females and with women's having made so much of progress, they are owners of so much of property, and succession disputes would come. Please keep all these things in mind. Now, let us now shift our focus to section 16. Section 16 talks of 3 golden rules of succession of a woman or a female. Section 16, if we just have a casual glance, it talks of order of succession and manner of distribution among heirs of female Hindu. Rule 1 is that among the heirs mentioned in subsection 1 of section 15, one entry shall be preferred to those in succeeding entry, and those included in same entry shall take simultaneously. Now, if we go back to section 15(1)(a), I had explained when explaining that if a female Hindu has left behind 2 sons, 3 daughters, husband, then property would be divided into 6 parts. They are all governed by clause A of section 1 of section 15, and they will get equal share 1/6 each. So if anyone from clause A is available, he or she excludes those falling in clause B, C, D, and E. That is how it operates. So rule 1 of section 16 says that one entry shall be preferred to the succeeding, to the those which are succeeding, and those included in same entry shall get equal share. This is rule number 1. Rule number 2 is that if any son or daughter of intestate had predeceased the intestate, leaving his or her own children alive at the time of intestate's death, the children of such daughter or son or daughter shall take between them the share which such son or daughter would have taken if living at the intestate's death. In simple words, I will just explain that if a female Hindu has died intestate, that is without any will or any testamentary document, and she has left behind, say, 1 son and children of another predeceased son. So once again, you have to create and assume a legal fiction that son or daughter is alive and is dying immediately after the death of that female. So that way, the property would be divided into, if she has left behind only two sons, one son and one predeceased son, then it will be divided into two parts, equal parts. The part which is falling in the share of a son who has predeceased, then it will go according to the succession of that son. That will be as per schedule and section 8 of the Hindu Succession Act. So I will just explain it, elaborate it further. If a female Hindu has died and she has left behind grandchildren from a predeceased child, then by legal fiction, it will be assumed that that predeceased child has died after the death of that female, immediately after the death of that female. So property would be divided as if that predeceased child was alive. Once that is divided, then according to her that deceased child succession, the property would be divided. This is second rule which has to be kept in mind. Now, rule 3. This is again very, very important. Just have a look at, I'm just reading that statutory language. The devolution of the property of the intestate on the heirs referred to in clause B, D and E of subsection 1 or in subsection 2 to section 15 shall be in the same order and according to the same rules as would have applied if the property had been the father's or the mother's or the husband's, as the case may be, and such person had died intestate in respect thereof immediately after the intestate's death. As I was talking, in normal language, this was a complicated language, but I can just simplify it, that by legal fiction, if the property will presume that if the succession is governed by section 15 subsection 2, by legal fiction, father or mother or husband would be deemed to be or assumed to be alive, and then the succession would go accordingly. But please keep in mind, if the female Hindu has left behind her own child or her grandchildren, then section 15(2) would not operate. Section 15(2) would operate only if she has not left behind her own children or grandchildren. Section 15(2) would operate if she has left behind her husband, because poor husband has been left out of explanation in clause A by the statute. Therefore, if she has left behind any child or grandchild, then succession is governed by section 15(1)(a). Otherwise, it will be governed by section 15(2) in case the property has come either from her father or from her mother or from her husband or from her husband father-in-law. So I'm not, once again, simple thing is, number 1, section 8 does not govern succession of a female or woman. The schedule attached to the Hindu Succession Act does not govern succession of interstate succession of a female. 3, if the property is self-acquired, it will be governed by section 15 subsection 1. various entries A, B, C, D, E. If the property she inherited from her father, her mother, her husband, her father-in-law, in absence of children or grandchildren, it will be governed by subsection 2, clause A and B, wherever it is applicable. And golden rules I have explained while discussing all these things. Now, with this, we come to end of this succession from women. Now, let us go to the second part, which should have been first part, but I thought that it is more appropriate to take up second part first. That is succession by a woman. Now, there are two sections which are important in this entire thing. One is section 14. Second is section 6, and everyone by now knows that latest judgment of larger bench in Vinita Sharma, the 3-judge bench, where conflict in two views has been explained, and section 6, the amendment in section 6 by 2005 Act has been explained. So this session is being divided into two parts. Let us first focus on section 14. Section 14 has been incorporated because of a reason that before coming into force of Hindu Succession Act 1956, most of time females or Hindu women would have only limited ownership or life interest or limited estate or restricted estate. These are the 4 words which are used for such thing. The framers of the act at that time thought that female Hindus and say women are equally important, or rather more important. They are mothers also, they are grandmothers, daughters, everybody. So it was considered that there should be an enlargement of the estate of a female Hindu. So therefore, section 14(1), which is very elaborate and very in other words, it can be said to be in the widest possible terms, that which it provides that if a female Hindu has inherited a property as a limited estate in recognition of her pre-existing right of maintenance or otherwise, then on coming into force of Hindu Succession Act 1956, her limited estate would enlarge into full ownership, or one can say absolute ownership. Now, kindly just have a look at section 14, subsection 1. And there is a lot of case law on this aspect. Judgments have been given and interpretations have been given. But just have a look at section 14(1). I'm just reading section 14(1). Property of a female Hindu to be her absolute property. As I was explaining, that limited estate is now converted into a absolute property. Subsection 1 reads, any property possessed by a female Hindu, whether acquired before or after the commencement of this act, shall be held by her as full owner thereof and not as a limited owner. So as I had explained that her limited estate or her restricted ownership or her life interest enlarges into a full estate, she becomes absolute owner of the property. Now there is an explanation which is most important part of this section 14. Explanation talks of that in this subsection, property includes both movable and immovable property acquired by a female Hindu by inheritance or device, or at a partition, or in lieu of maintenance, or arrears of maintenance, or by gift from any person, whether a relative or not, before, at, or after her marriage, or by her own skill or exertion, or by purchase or by prescription, or in any other manner whatsoever, and also any such property held by her as Stridhana immediately before the commencement of this act. That means if she got the property from by any of the method provided in explanation to section 14(1), then that limited estate or restricted ownership or life interest would stand enlarged to absolute ownership. Leading case on this is, if you want to note, is in V. Tulsama and others versus Sesha Reddy. This is 1977, 3 SCC, page 99. This is a celebrated judgment which is followed till today, and 2 separate judgments have been written, and what has been laid down is that section 14 subsection 1 is couched in the widest possible terms, and therefore it has to be liberally construed. So whenever a woman or a female has got a property and it is governed by section 14 subsection 1, falls within the explanation, then she becomes absolute owner of the property. Now with this we now shift our focus to subsection 2, which is in the nature of an exception. If we plainly read, it appears that subsection 1 and subsection 2 are somewhere having a conflicting ideas, but I will just explain how this operates. Let us read subsection 2. Subsection 2, it reads as, nothing contained in subsection 1 shall apply to any property acquired by way of gift or under a will or any other instrument or under a decree or order of a civil court or under an award where the terms of the gift, will or other instrument or the decree or order or award prescribe a restricted estate in such property. On plain reading, one would say that this is absolutely contrary to what is provided in subsection 1. But this has been explained and considered in that very judgment as I have referred to in Tulsama. The Supreme Court has held that where the instruments will gift, decree, award, create independent and new title in favor of female for the first time, then section 14 subsection 2 would update. That means, or in other words, that if she got the property by any of these instrument, will, gift, decree, award, etc., and that she got the property not in recognition of her pre-existing right of either maintenance or otherwise, but she got the property independently and a new title was created, then the succession would be governed by subsection 2 and not by subsection 1. Now, leading case on subsection 2 is Mostma Karmi versus Amru and others. This is reported as 1972 4 SEC page 86. This is again a 3 judgment which has been followed in 2 very significant judgments with arising from Punjab. First is in the case of Sadhu Singh versus Gurdwara Sahib, Narike. It is reported as 2006 8 SEC page 75. And second is Shivdev Kaur versus RS Garewal, AIR 2013 Supreme Court page 1620. If one is interested, I can give one more citation which discusses the entire case law and very elaborate judgment has been given. Please make a note. Judgment is K. Kalyan Swami versus L. Bhaktha Vasalam. This is reported in 2020 SEC Online Supreme Court page 584. Justice Joseph has given a detailed judgment going into the entire history, and he has elaborately discussed how the law has developed. He has discussed judgments even prior to Tulsama, and all these things have been done. Now, to sum up section 14. So section 14, the basic scheme is enlargement of estate of a female Hindu in contradistinction to limited estate as provided under that ordinary Hindu law or customary law, or even that act which was the Hindu Women's Right to Property Act 1937. So wherever there was any provision for limited estate or restricted estate or life interest, those have been superseded and estate has been enlarged. Only exception is that if she has got the property as a limited estate because of an independent title or a new title has been created and property is not referable to her pre-existing right, then only it will remain as limited estate or restricted estate. Otherwise, it will enlarge into a full ownership. She becomes absolute owner of the property. Now, with this we conclude section 14, and now we come to section 6. Section 6, as everybody knows, was amended in 2005. It has come into force. Subsection section 6 amended section has come into force with effect from 9 September 2005. Previously, before this amendment, women were not part of coparcenary. Section 6 talks of coparcenary. So the legislature thought that this is discriminatory and we are doing injustice to the women, Hindu women. Therefore, the amendment was made, and now, as per amended provision, section 6, which I have told you that came into force with effect from 9 September 2005. Daughter also becomes a co-partner. She's equivalent to a son. She gets all the rights and the liabilities equivalent to the son. Now understand the change. Previously, females, daughters were not part of coparcenary. By amendment in 2005, daughter has been made a copartner with effect from 9th September 2005. Now, but there are two provisions which must be noticed, because there is little bit of vacuum and I feel that that has not been interpreted. Just have a look at subsection 3 of section 6. Subsection 3 of section 6, which is amended, provides that if a Hindu dies after commencement of Hindu Succession Amendment Act 2005, his interest in the property of a joint Hindu family governed by the Mitakshara law shall devolve by testamentary or interstate succession and not by survivorship. So if a member of coparcenary dies after commencement of 2005 amended act, his share would not devolve upon by devolution or survivorship, but it will devolve upon by testamentary or interstate succession. To elaborate it further, this is my understanding, there is no judgment on this aspect, that if a copartner has died, his share would be determined in coparcenary on the death by deeming fiction, and that property would not go by survivorship on the remaining copartners, but it will go by succession, either under section 8 or section 15 if she is a female, and if he has left behind a testamentary document or a will, then by will. This provision has been made. On the one hand, the scope of coparcenary is being increased by saying that the daughters are being made copartners, but subsection 3 has been incorporated to say that if after 2005 Act, a copartner dies, then his share, I'm talking about his share in coparcenary would go by testamentary or interstate succession and not by survivorship. This is one important thing. Second important thing about section 6 is the amended section 6 is that section 6 subsection 1 is added to a proviso has been added to section 6 subsection 1, which is of utmost significance. That proviso provides that if any co-partnership property has been disposed of, alienated, including partition, by partition or testamentary disposition, before 20th December 2004. Now, please keep in mind the date mentioned is 20th December 2004 and not 9th September 2005. 20th December 2004 is the date on which the bill was moved in the Parliament to amend Hindu Succession Act. So what has been provided is that if co-partnership property has been disposed of, alienated, partitioned, or disposed of by testamentary succession before 20th December 2004, amended section 6 would have no effect. That means co-partnership came to an end. Once co-partnership came to an end, it would not revive because of section 6, amendment in section 6, and therefore the daughter doesn't get anything. But question is, one has to prove that the co-partnership has come to an end. Property has been not, it's not necessary that co-partnership must come to an end. Some property has been disposed of. I'm sorry, I use the word co-partnership. If a property has been disposed of, then that is not affected by the amendment. Now, this is the basic scheme of section 6 of the amended act. Now let us come to the last part of our session, which is that judgment of 3-judge bench in Vanita Sharma. Please make a note that has now been reported. SEC Online is very fast in reporting all these judgments. Vanita Sharma is VINEETA. It is 2020 SEC Online, Supreme Court, page 641. Why this matter was referred to a larger bench is there was an earlier judgment in the case of Prakash and others versus Phulwati, 2016, 2 SEC page 36. Supreme Court interpreted that amended section 6 would apply only if both co-partners, that is co-partner and his daughter, were alive on the date of commencement of the act, that is 9th September 2005. So interpretation was that section 6 would operate only if co-partner or the father and his daughter are alive on the date the amended act was enforced. The court interpreted that language of section 6 is clearly prospective and therefore it would apply if both are alive. Then there was difference in view in Danamma versus Amar and others. This is 2018 3 SEC page 343. In this case, although the bench of Supreme Court agreed with Prakash, but took a different view. In that case, father had died in the year 2001. The court held that the daughter who was born before the amending act would be a co-partner even if her father has died before the amending act came into force. So view taken was different, but although in the discussion the bench agreed with the view of Prakash that it's prospective. Noticing this conflict in view, the matter was referred to larger bench, and recently that judgment has come authored by Justice Mishra, who has really gone into minute details and given an elaborate judgment. Ultimately, what has been held is, number one, amending act confers status of co-partner on the daughter born before or after amendment in the same manner as son with same rights and liabilities. So first conclusion is that daughter, whether born before or after the amendment, becomes a co-partner on an equal footing with equal status to that of a son. Second conclusion is, if the daughter was born earlier to 9 September 2005, I'm sorry. Second conclusion is, the daughter born earlier can claim rights with effect from 9 September 2005. So she becomes a co-partner on enforcement of the amending act, that is 9 September 2005. If a daughter is born before 9 September 2005, she would not be co-partner, but she becomes co-partner by legislative fiat with effect from 9 September 2005. Third conclusion is that it is not necessary that the co-partner or the father should be living on 9 September 2005. Now, we can explain this in a with an example. If a father dies, he has left behind 2 sons and some grandsons, and married daughter. Married daughter would become co-partner even if her father had died before 9 September 2005 in the co-partnership left behind by her father. That means she gets same right with her brothers as her brothers have got. Her rights and liabilities as a co-partner are same as her brother. Now, next conclusion is that there was a statutory fiction of partition under section 6 prior to this amending act came. Statutory fiction was this, that if a co-partner dies and leaves behind a female heir, class 1 heir, then by legal fiction there will be partition of co-partnery, and that by legal fiction, the lady would get share, because everybody now knows this. There are number of judgments that if a co-partner dies after coming into force of 1956 Act, even before amendment of 2005, and has left behind a female heir, then by legal fiction there will be partition. By that legal legal fiction partition, she would get some share, because otherwise she was not a member of co-partnery. She could not get otherwise any property. So to ensure that she gets the property, legal fiction of partition was included. Now, what has been explained in this judgment is that partition by legal fiction under section 6 would not be a partition for the purpose of proviso to subsection 1 of section 6. That means if father has died before 9/9/2005, 9 September 2005, by legal fiction, the daughter gets some share or widow gets some share, that would not be taken as a partition of the property for the purpose of denying the daughter a right to become co-partner. That fictional partition would not come in the way of a daughter becoming co-partner after coming into force of 2005 Amending Act, that is 9 September 2005. Now the last conclusion is that only such partitions would be recognized if those partitions are by a registered document or recognized by a court decree. And that is the language of section proviso to section 6, because if we read, it says provided that nothing contained in this subsection shall affect or invalidate any disposition or alienation, including any partition or testamentary disposition of property which had taken place before 20th December 2004. I think I have said somewhere in 9 September. For partition, the date has to be seen is
So can you hear me? I think your voice just, you lost your voice, sir. So could you hear me? Just give us a minute. I will just check and bring it back. We're checking. I think there's some technical issue. I'll get it rectified. Just give us a minute. We're trying to reconnect with sir again. It might take a minute or two. Sir, good morning.
Morning. The meeting has ended.
No, sir, it's not ended. वो बीच में there's an interruption, so we just getting back. There was some internet problem at Chennai Judicial Academy, so we are just trying to reconnect with Justice Anil Kshetra, sir. So,
But this is still showing as live.
so it is going live. Sir's internet just got snapped at abruptly, so we are just trying to reconnect him to a new internet connection.
Okay.
Session is still going on.
Okay.
So,
Shall best wishes.
so. So, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I think Anil sir, Justice Anil has also joined in. Justice Kshetra sir has also joined in. Just checking with him. Sir, welcome back. I think there was some technical glitch at your, I think, sir, at the Chandigarh Judicial Academy level.
So we can.
So we can continue, sir.
Again, I think everybody is live now.
Yes, sir. Everyone is live, sir.
Yes. There was some technical glitch, so therefore, I think I will have to start once again from conclusion number 4, because I don't know from where we lost our connection. Conclusion number 4 is with regard to statutory fiction, which was created under unamended section of section 6, which provided that if a co-partner died when unamended section was unamended Hindu Succession Act was in force, and he has left behind a class 1 female Hindu, a female heir, then by statutory fiction, partition was assumed, and on that basis, that female Hindu got the property, share in the property. What has been explained is that partition by statutory fiction would not obstruct or would not come in the way of a daughter becoming co-partner. So partition has to be actual by metes and bounds, by registered document, or through a court decree, or it has to be proved beyond doubt that there was a partition. Last conclusion is that partition of the property, co-partnership property, would be recognized only in 3 eventualities. 1, it is by registered document. 2, it is recognized by court. 3, if it was an oral partition, but it is supported by public documents, and partition, final partition is proved, and this has a relation to the date, that is 20th December 2004. Amending Act comes into force on 9th September 2004, but the date for partition is mentioned as 20th December 2004. That is the day when the bill was moved in the parliament. So any partition, any disposition, either by testamentary succession or otherwise, if it has taken place after 20th December 2004, that would not affect the rights of a daughter who becomes co-partner. Three-judge bench has even gone on to the extent of saying and laying down that if in a suit for partition, preliminary decree for partition has been passed before 20th December 2004, since there is no final partition, therefore her rights remain unaffected. In other words, unless there is final partition by metes and bounds recognized either by a registered document or by a court decree, or there is evidence which proves that partition has taken place by means and bounds, and such evidence should be supported by public documents, or it should be proved before the court. I would go to the use of extent of using the words beyond shadow of reasonable doubt, then only the rights of daughter are affected, otherwise these are not affected. So with this, my session is, from my side the session is over. Now I hand over to the moderator to invite question and answers. Let us try to make an attempt to answer those questions, sir.
We have enough questions already.
All right, let us.
Question, so I will.
You will have to be a little bit loud, sir. Your voice is not.
So can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes.
So I'll start with the first question, sir.
Yes.
So the question is, if a woman died natural death after 1 year of marriage and has not executed will, then who will inherit her self-acquired movable and immovable property, which was acquired before marriage?
Answer is simple. We have to just go by the statute. If it is a self-acquired property, it goes by section 15, subsection 1, which provide for 5 different eventualities. If she has left behind her sons and daughters and the husband,
yes, sir,
it goes to husband. If as you're saying, it is within 1 year of marriage, probably she doesn't have child. If she doesn't have child, then her husband gets the property. If her husband is also not there, then heirs of her husband get the property. That is the second category. If they are also not there, then upon the mother and father. Fourthly, upon the heirs of father. Fifthly, on the heirs of mother, because it is self-acquired property.
Self-acquired property.
Right.
So, moving to the next question, sir. Now, it's about, can a husband claim any right in the property asserting it was purchased by him for his wife, and he had paid for the entire property from his own funds?
Answer is yes. It is governed by Benami Prohibition Act. There, the exception has been created, and wherever there is a fiduciary relationship, a person has purchased the property either in the name of, I think, children and wife both are included, then she can, one can claim.
So now, so moving to the question of, in the case of surrogacy, whether a child born through surrogacy will be treated as a natural child? of intended mother as against surrogate mother for the purposes of succession to property of the intended mother?
I will have to examine and seek passover of this question because I have not examined surrogacy. There is now probably a legislation on governing this field.
Right, sir.
We will have to examine that because that would not be, it will not be appropriate for me to answer without being, unless I'm very sure.
Absolutely makes sense, sir. Absolutely makes sense. I think we can come back to this. Moving to the next one, sir. It's a scenario-based question, so I'll go a bit slow and stop me if I need to repeat something. First of all, regards to you, sir, and thank you for the session. Now talking about section 15.2, subpart 2, whether it refers to natural hairs or testamental hairs. That's the first question. And the member has explained this question with an example. In case property inherited from father, unmarried female dies. Father during his lifetime has executed a will in favor of the female and son of the father, excluding his wife, mother, and I think it's too much this thing, but I think that we'll go with the first question itself.
Right. That's how the law.
Yeah. So, and after death of female, her property would pass on to all the remaining natural heirs of father or remaining testamentary heirs of father.
Answer to first part is 15.2 operates only in case of natural succession. That is interstate succession, not testamentary succession.
Okay.
Testamentary succession is governed by either Indian Succession Act or one can refer to section 30, which is in chapter 3 of Hindu Succession Act.
So.
Chapter 3 is entirely different. A female can execute a will and bypass whatever is provided in section 15 or prefer one from another. That is entirely her wish because it is her absolute property. Section 14.1 I explained is her absolute property.
Okay.
Now she's, I think the question is, and if I have understood it correctly, is the question asked is if a father by will has bequeathed his property in favor of his son and daughter.
Yes, sir.
And daughter dies interstate, unmarried. What happens?
Yes, sir.
The property would go back to by deeming fiction to the father. But according to my understanding, this is my interpretation, it will go by natural succession, not by testamentary succession, which the father left. Because if we operate that, then it will again come back to the dead daughter who has died. So that's why it will go back to the father. Father will be deemed to have died after her death, but it will go by natural succession of the father. Section 8 would operate.
Okay. So I think, sir, I think you actually answered the question as well, and you also guided the person because the section was the member had asked the question of section 15.2. So as for you, that is natural hairs. So thank you so much, sir. Moving to the next one.
Yes.
So we talked about the Benami transactions initially in the second question. This says that is law on Benami transaction an exception to section 14 of Hindu Succession Act?
They are operating on different fields. They are not in any way conflict. Section 14 operates in a basically section 14 was conceptualized when Benami Transaction Act was not there. That Prohibition Act came much later.
So,
and Benami Transaction Act is only, that Prohibition Act is only when property is being purchased by a person, not in his own name, but it is being purchased in the name of somebody else. And that's why these exceptions have been created, that if a person purchases the property in the name of his own children or wife he can purchase, he is not liable for conviction, he has not committed any offense. But my view is Section 14 and Benami Prohibition Act can't be compared. These are they operate entirely in different fields, because this Section 14 is talking about enlargement of a state. Section 14 enlargement of a state is if the property has been received from somebody and that enlarges. If Section 14(1) the property has been received in recognition of her right of maintenance, it will enlarge. If it is pre-existing right, it will enlarge. If it is not received because of pre-existing right, it's a new title created. Somebody wants to gift a property to his wife on birthday, then that becomes her absolute property.
So,
Right.
so there's a question from Baljinder Sara, sir, member of the General Judicial Academy.
Because he is very thorough.
So first
Yes.
of all, he has conveyed his regards to the Lordship, and he has said that thank you so much for such an engaging and enlightening session. The question that sir is asking is, what is the yardstick or parameters to find out in a given situation to whether the female Hindu has got the limited interest or estate in lieu of a pre-existing right after the commencement of Hindu Succession Act 1956?
Basically, it depends upon facts of the case. There cannot be any straitjacket formula in which we can say that these are the parameters. Basically, what has been interpreted is that the interpretation has to be in favor of a female. The interpretation has to be very liberal. It is of widest amplitude, and if the court comes to a conclusion after appreciation of evidence that the property is in lieu of her pre-existing right, then it will the limited estate would enlarge. But as Mr. Sara has asked, we can't lay down any parameters that these will be the parameters. These all depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case and the evidence available.
So I'm moving to the next question. Have been executed as my daughter. Yes. So request to elaborate on the effect of repealing an Amendment Act 2015 or Hindu Succession Act, which provides that Hindu Succession Act 2005 has been repealed to the extent of whole.
There is no repealing of 2015 Act, if my knowledge is correct, sir. My information is correct. I don't think 2015 Act was never repealed. There is no repealing of.
No, sir. It says 2015 Amendment of 2015 has repealed 2005 Act.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Maybe so.
You can check. I don't think there is any amendment in Hindu Succession Act in 2015. Amendment.
Better repealing Amendment Act on the Succession Act, which provides the Hindu.
You can open SEC right now and see if it is.
So
something has escaped my notice, but let us just.
Check. Otherwise, sir, what we can do is we can go to the next question. I've requested the member who has asked the question to please confirm
Please. In the meantime, I will check out. I have opened my laptop. I will just check.
So
Yes.
I can check otherwise if you want.
No. Please go ahead with the next question, sir.
So the next question is, what would be the fate of dispositions or alienations made between 20th of December 2004 to 9th of September 2005, would a daughter be able to claim right in such a property and on the basis of amendment provisions as a co-parsoner?
Answer is yes. That is the basic proviso is very clear that dispositions, alienations, partition of the property has to be before 20th December 2004. If it is after that, it doesn't affect the rights of a daughter.
So now talking about whether a female gets a restricted estate in a property by virtue of a will, as per section 14 subpart 2, then where will the said property go after her demise?
No, you have to just repeat the question, sir.
So it's a restricted estate that the female has got by the virtue of will, as per section 14 subpart 2. Then the question is, then if once she dies, what will happen to that property? Where will that property go?
That will be governed by section 15.
Okay.
That will be governed by, no, question is with regard to limited estate.
Restricted estate is the word being used over here.
Section restricted estate.
Yes,
if
sir.
that is a restricted estate, then as per that whatever document she got, if it provided that after her death the property would revert back to so and so, it will govern that.
Okay.
It will not be governed by section 15. It will be governed by that document which created that restricted estate or limited estate.
So
there is no amendment in 2015. Please tell that whoever has posed the question.
I have already asked.
My information, there is amending act is only in 2005. Thereafter, there is no amending act.
So
this is what your SEC online is telling me. Rest is.
I can't say anything now. It's right.
All right.
Yes. So moving to the next question.
Yes.
So section 6 subpart 3 uses the word his interest, and going with the definition of section 3 subpart 2, his does not include her. And then there is an amendment as to inclusion of her in section 30, but not in section 6 subpart 3. Does it mean section 6 subpart 3 is applicable to only male Hindus and not female Hindus?
The answer is on plain reading, the word used is his, not her. So therefore, we will have to take that it is only with regard to male. Because it is talking about probably why this word his interest has been used is because this by amendment earlier before amendment only male were part of co-parsonery, females were not.
Yes.
Question here is if a male Hindu dies after the act, then his interest has to be governed by subsection 3. And whatever is the language of statute, we can't play with it. So according to my opinion, it will be only his interest, not her interest.
So,
right.
Very well, sir. Now, sir, talking about a Hindu male makes will of his self-acquired property, thereby giving life estate without mentioning that it is for her maintenance, right, to his wife. Then would that be covered under section 14 subpart 1 or 14 subpart 2?
It will depend upon the evidence. If the wife leads evidence and proves that she had a pre-existing right of maintenance, then it will be governed by section 14 subsection 1. That means her estate would enlarge. But if she fails to prove, then it will be governed by subsection 2.
So, thank you, sir. So, the question is from Praveen Kumar, sir, ADJ of Panipat District Court. Sir is first of all giving regards to you, sending his regards. And the question is, if the father has died prior to 1956, whether still the daughter born before 1956 and still alive have same equal rights as to of a son in view of amendment of section 6.
Answer is yes, but there is one caveat there too. The daughter has to prove that the Kopasni continue to exist. Words used in the statute are born before. Before can be 10 years before, it can be even before 56.
Yes.
But it has to be proved that the Kopasni continued and was in existence on the day the act came into force, that is 9 September 2005.
Okay. So there's a if attached to it.
A caveat attached, and that is very big if.
So now the question about succession, that is the first part of discourse in today's session. Succession from women. Couple died in a road accident on the spot in such a manner that the order of their death could not be ascertained. The wife was 2 years younger to her husband. They were issueless. There is no heir, agnate or cognate of the husband. The wife is survived by her only heir, her father. Would the state be able to stake claim over the estate of the husband against the father of the wife by the way of escheat?
Not escheat. This is a tricky question. I will just try to answer.
Okay, sir.
Probably the question asked is with reference to there is a provision in the Hindu Succession Act which is governed by section 21 of the Hindu Succession Act, which provides that presumption in case of simultaneous death. Section 21 provides that if more than one person has died simultaneously and it is not possible to determine who has died earlier, then presumption is that the younger has died subsequently. Suppose husband and wife were traveling on a ship.
Okay.
Missile hits, both die. Now it is not possible to determine who died first. Statutory, as per section 21, it will presume that the wife, assumed to be younger, or she is younger, has died later on. If there was some self-acquired property of husband which came to wife for split of second, because that is the statutory presumption, then section 15 subsection 2 would govern, because the property came from husband, it will go back to husband, regulated by that. If the property she received was from her father, she died subsequently by legal fiction, it will go back to father, and father's succession would govern. So that is how it will operate. Because that is, this question is relating to section 21. 21 is when simultaneously two persons have died, two or more persons have died, then presumption is, and it's well settled that the succession never remains in abeyance, even for a split of second. The moment someone dies, his property passes on. The next moment. There is not, even if there is a difference of 1 second, the property has passed on.
Okay.
Right? So presumption is, and that is a statutory presumption, that whosoever is younger, if husband is younger, husband has died later on. If wife is younger, wife has died later on.
Okay. It's sir. Sir, a couple of, I think, 5 more questions.
Yes.
Whether sales deed, will transfer deed, which have already been executed or have effect the right of daughter while taking into consideration the latest pronouncement of Honorable Apex Court?
Answer is yes, if these are before 20th December 2004, not 9 September 2005. That's I am once again emphasizing. Please make a note. The transfer has to take place before 20th December 2004. Word use is before. If it is on 20th December, still it doesn't affect the right of the daughter.
So basically, we have to go with like there's a very thin line between.
That's right. That's right.
So you have to be very careful with that. So
that's why when I spoke to Mr. Balram Gupta and we discussed, I thought that this is a topic which needs a little bit of discussion. Yes.
So moving to the next one. The proposition is that if daughter gets right in the co-pastory property of her father, whether after the daughter's death, the daughter and the sons of the daughter became co-partner with the brother and their heirs.
According to me, there is a vacuum and law is silent on this. But once daughter has died, co-partnership continues, she has died interstate, then her children would become co-partners.
Okay.
But this is my view. There is, according to my interpretation on this, and the Act doesn't throw light on this specifically.
So if the Act is silent, I think then we should not be commenting anything on it. So moving to the next one. In reference to Rule 2 of Section 16, what would be the position if the predeceased son or daughter had made a will in respect of devolution of his properties? Would the will of predeceased be operative in respect of the property now inherited from mother?
Again, same question. It is basically Rule 2 is talking of legal fiction. Otherwise, actually the person has already died. If it is a legal fiction, then that testamentary disposition would not operate. It will go by natural succession. Because actually that person has already died. It's only because of legal fiction we are assuming that he was alive. And subsection Rule 2 does not talk of testamentary succession.
Okay, sir. So I think this is the second last question. The question is whether a female co-partner can claim partition of a property before male co-partner in a joint Hindu co-partner property in which she was not co-partner prior to amendment of 2005.
You have to repeat the question, please.
Yeah, there's so many. I know.
It's a tricky question.
The question was, sir, whether a female co-partner can claim a partition of a property before male co-partner in a joint Hindu co-partner property in which she was not a co-partner prior to the amendment of 2005.
After 2005, she becomes absolute. She has same rights as son. Therefore, yes, she can claim the property. Before that, she was not a co-partner. Therefore, she could not.
Okay, she can, right?
She can after the 2005 amendment. She has got the same right equivalent to the son. That is the language of the section, that she gets same rights and liabilities as son or brother. Yes.
So this brings us to the last question of the session. That is, if husband executed a will in favor of his wife that she will entertain the property during her lifetime, but after her death, the said property will go to Goshal. Question is is this whether she can dispose of the property in her lifetime.
Same thing if it is covered by section 14 subsection 1. If she is able to establish that this will has been executed in her favor, the property has been bequeathed in her favor because of a pre-existing right of maintenance or any other right, then it will become absolute property. She can dispose of the property. If she is unable to do that, then it will be limited estate. It will be governed by that will. Once she dies, the property would go according to the wish of the owner, that male person.
So this brings us to end of this very informative session. I think Balram sir and what you discussed, that this would be a quite informative session and it will be a very tricky one. I think it's pretty evident from the time. It's already 1:30 and we still have, I'm sure that people would still have a lot of questions. And you, as a speaker for today's session, would still have a lot to discuss. So I think Balram sir and you can decide if there's another session required. We can probably have it in the time to come. Otherwise, I think members who have joined in today's session, they already have the access to connect with the Academy straight away and then connect through Academy to you. So that would be there. I will also be sharing the questions that have been asked today, sir, completely all the questions with the Balram sir.
I try to answer wherever it is possible, sir.
So though you have already answered all the questions, so that is I think there's one thing that has been that we just left it for last moment. That was 2015 and 2005 amendment. So I got an update on that. So you're saying that there's a 2015 Amendment Act which came into effect on 13th of May 2015. And it is given on the entry number 39.
Since he's not showing, then I will excuse myself, because unless I have examined, I will not be in a position. It would not be appropriate for me to say anything.
So
I have not seen this amendment because just check. I don't think there is.
So I'm also just checking. Just give me a minute. I'll just also check.
Or it may not have been enforced. It was just amendment was brought and never enforced.
Maybe so. Maybe because like I just checked on SEC, it is not there. So. Sir, one thing I think I should put it on record that there have been so much of regard that have been sent across through the chats. I couldn't really read it out during the session, but I think now is the time. There's so many comments saying that thank you for such an elaborative session, thank you for such an exhaustive session, and for such an interesting session. So, on behalf of everyone, the members who joined from Punjab and Haryana, different districts. I would like to thank you, sir, for taking your time, especially coming out to Academy. That's another aspect that I have to put it on record. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time. Thank you so much for sharing
very much. I hope that this session would help every one of us to adjudicate properly. That is, this is my wish, and I would only, as a last thing, I would say that whenever you are confronted or you get a chance to decide, first master the facts or marshal the facts, those facts, and then examine the Bare Act. Once we examine the Bare Act or the statute, everything would follow. And once facts are clear to you, you have examined the act, the decision is not difficult.
So.
And I would be very happy if brother judges start quoting provisions of the act rather than judgments. They refer to that this is section governed by section 15, clause 2, clause 1, clause non-obstante clause. That will the quality of judgments would increase. And last word is, this is a difficult time. We must make an effort and to sail through this difficult time. Please stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Sanjay Kapoor, sir, do you want to say something?
I would
Hello,
like to
Mr.
thank.
Kapoor. How are you?
Absolutely
Long
fine,
time no
Lordship.
see.
Yes, Lordship, thank you so much. In fact, I was also one of the beneficiary of today's session. It was so, I think, enlightening. You made such a complex subject in explained everything in such a lucid fashion that even a non-technical person like me and Chetan also, I think we were, I think, huge beneficiary of today's session. So thank you so much. We are also, I
Was
think,
only to,
extending our.
share whatever knowledge I have and
So it's a great honor and privilege to, in fact, be a I think associate with such I think literal and I think the educative and academic activity by the Chandigarh Judicial Academy, and it's a privilege and honor to be, I think, with you, and I think sharing the information which is, I think, of use to the brother judges across the state, and I'm sure everybody is immensely benefited with today's session. Thank you so very much for making us a part of the session. So thank you so much.
sir, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We will meet in the next session now. Have a great day ahead. And like Sir said, stay safe and take care of yourself. Thank you so much.